Okay, let's begin. We are at our third session tonight, in which we will be discussing the Talmud. And we will we'll discuss the Talmud. We'll discuss a little bit of its history, a little bit of what it is, how it works, the structure of the Talmud, and then we'll take some time to learn a little bit of Talmud. Grab a book. It's a book class. You got to have a book. So, Talmudic logic. Maybe you've heard this one, but it's an oldie but goodie. You need the book. You need the book. A person comes to a rabbi and says, "My Jewish friends are always telling me about the Yiddish cup and how sharp their minds become from studying the Talmud. Can you explain to me how Talmudic logic works?" "Okay," says the rabbi, "let's try to imagine. Two thieves climb down a chimney, and when they come out, one of them has a face black with soot, and the other one's face is clean. Which one of them goes to wash his face?" Nope, the man thinks that's easy. The one who has a dirty face will wash his face. "You think?" says the rabbi. "No, that's not how it is. Think again. The fellow with the clean face is going to look at the fellow with the dirty face, and he will think that his face is dirty, so he'll wash his face. And the fellow with the dirty face will look at the fellow with the clean face, and he'll think that he's clean, and he won't wash his face." Oh, says the man. So the one with the clean face washes his face. "No," says the rabbi. "That's not how it goes. You're not thinking logically. Tell me, you think it's possible that two people come down the same chimney and one of them would come out dirty and the other one would come out clean? That's not logic." "Oh, so then both of them wash their faces," says the man. "Oy vey izmir," says the rabbi. "You don't get it. Tell me, two thieves climbing down a chimney, you think they're worried if their faces are dirty? They're going to grab their loot and run." So this is even though it's a joke, it's a pretty good illustration of what in Talmudic language we call pilpul. Pilpul literally means pepper because it's sharp. And it's a form of hair-splitting, mind-sharpening dialogue with arguments, counter-arguments, proofs and counter-proofs, logical structures, and that one presents and knocks them down, as the Talmud describes it, uproots mountains and grinds them together. And so that when the dust settles, the idea that remains has been analyzed and tested from every possible angle. We think about it in all different circumstances and possibilities. And through this process, we are able to then get to the essence of the idea and understand it with a kind of clarity that allows us to apply it then into other circumstances. So pilpul is one of the most important methodologies in Talmudic study, but the Talmud also uses other methods and systems to analyze Torah ideas and the principles and laws that are discussed. So hopefully today we'll get to study some Talmudic texts and use some of those methods. But before we get into that, we have to first answer the original question: what is the Talmud? So when we talk about Jewish learning and Jewish literature, the importance of Talmud cannot be overstated. The Talmud there is no other work in the body of Jewish teaching that is as important and central to Jewish teaching as the Talmud. The Talmud, now, so if you want to ask, what is the Talmud? I have to say, it's not a simple answer. So here is, I think I have to unblur my background here. I'll show you a book of the Talmud. Here is Talmud Tractate Gittin. This is the last one that we learned in our Shabbos afternoon Talmud class. And so first of all, it's Talmud, but it's not the whole Talmud. It's one of 63 books. Talmud comprises of 63 books. And so this is 1/63 of the Talmud. Second of all, the Talmud is not a book in the way that we normally think of a book. The Talmud is not written by one author or even by a dozen authors. The Talmud contains teachings from hundreds of sages over more than 600 years and even beyond. So, and I say even beyond because the text of the Talmud itself is approximately spans teachings of about 600 years. But this actual book of Talmud contains teachings even beyond that. Because as you look at the Talmud, right, here is this part is the Talmud, right? This is the central text is the Talmud. But around it are also the commentaries and other components, which we'll discuss. And those are also considered, a person could say, I'm studying Talmud, and they didn't spend any time on the Talmud itself. They spent all day on the commentaries. And those have been published. Those incorporate teachings from an additional 600, 700, 800 years. Let's take a look at the Talmud itself. Before we go, if you look at your book on page 96, this is really important because it gives us an opportunity to look inside at a page of Talmud, and we will just break it apart a little bit. Okay. So you see the section that's marked A in the middle of the page. It's got like a pink line next to it. Yeah. That is actually the Mishnah. Okay. The Mishnah was we'll go into a little bit later describing exactly what the Mishnah is, but the Mishnah forms the source text for the Talmud, concise laws that are then analyzed and discussed in the rest of the text called the Talmud. That's section B, that it's just before that break line in the middle of the page and after. That's the core of the Talmud. That's the discussion around the meaning of the Mishnah, the analysis of the Mishnah. Okay, then we go to section. So that's the Mishnah and the Talmud was written in around the 1st century and then into the 5th and 6th century. Okay.
A and B are the Mishnah.
A is the Mishnah, B is the Talmud. The reason why the middle of the page is the A, that's Mishnah. And then the top of the page, the top half of the center section, is the continuation of the Talmud discussion on the previous Mishnah, actually the previous chapter in this case. And and then that same, in my version, it's black and white. So I think it's like a little bit of a darker purple in your book. In the bottom half of that central text is the continuation of the Talmud. And if you look at the very beginning of that line, the bold letters Gimel Mem stand for Gemara. Okay. Then we have, so that's the whole thing. Now, a Mishnah will have several pages of Talmudic discussion around it. Okay. Then we move on to section C.
Wait 1 second. every other.
Yes.
The Talmud include the Mishnah.
The Talmud includes the Mishnah. So when we say Talmud, this is a page of Talmud here, right? So actually, when a person says they're learning Gemara or they're learning Talmud, they would refer to the whole book, to the whole body of study. Now we're breaking down the elements of what that is. So that middle section happens to be a Mishnah, meaning if you
I'm on Gemara.
and the Gemara or the Talmud, actually Talmud and Gemara is the same thing. Gemara is Aramaic, Talmud is Hebrew. It means study. Mishnah is a teaching.
The Mishnah and commentary.
Yeah, a Mishnah and Talmudic discussion of that Mishnah.
No. It's full Talmud, no?
The word Talmud means study. Today we're clarifying the nuance around the word Talmud, and it can mean multiple things. A person can say, look into the Gemara, look into the text of the Gemara, and what they mean is look into the middle section. Or a person could say, I'm learning Gemara, and what they mean is there's somewhere in this book. Okay? So we'll get to that. I'm going to get to there. We're going to break down content in a moment, but now I'm just looking at structure. Okay. So like I said, there can be several pages of Gemara discussion or Talmud discussion on one Mishnah. Okay. Then section C. So that would be on your left side of the page, immediately flanking the inner text, the Talmud text, is Rashi. We're all familiar with Rashi. Rashi is the most important commentary on the Talmud that explains the basic meaning of its wording and sometimes gives expanded explanation into the gist of what the Talmud is trying to say. Or you can sometimes insert words that are that help to clarify the text. Because in order to study Talmud, you need to know a few things. First of all, the Talmud includes a lot of Aramaic, and also it includes obscure language, logical language. There's a specific, even a person who knows Aramaic might not be familiar with the Talmudic style of Aramaic. So Rashi helps both with the Talmud is also written in shorthand often. Rashi can sometimes insert some clarifying text and also give explanations to different words, etc. Then Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, he was born in 1040 and he passed away in 1105. On the right-hand side of the page, that's section D, flanking the inner text on the right side, is the Tosafot. The Tosafot is an anthology of commentaries who lived in Western Europe, France, Germany, England, during the 12th and 13th centuries, and they included a number of Rashi's students, including one of the foremost Tosafists, Bale Tosafos, was Rashi's grandson, Rabbeinu Yaakov Tam. The style of Tosafot is to both analyze the text and also to reconcile Talmudic passages, different Talmudic passages across the Talmud. So by the time Rashi has finished his commentary, you have a school of people who have made it their business to study the entire Talmud in its totality and to see the Talmud rather as like Rashi does, to see each passage on its own. The Tosafos are trying always to put each text of the Talmud into the greater context of what the Talmud is saying. And so their work would be then to reconcile seeming contradictions throughout the Talmud. Rabbeinu Tam is part of, yes, that's why we have Rashi Tefillin, Rabbeinu Tam Tefillin, yes. That goes back to a discussion in the text of the Talmud that relates to Tefillin. That Rashi reads it one way, Rabbeinu Tam in the Tosafot reads it a different way. And so sometimes there will be differences of opinion between the Tosafos and Rashi, between the authors of the Tosafos and Rashi. And these two are indispensable to reading the Talmudic text, and they are standard on every page of Talmud. Then we have section E, which is on the far left in the center, the middle of the page, on the right side of the page in the middle. That's Rabbeinu Hananel, section E. Rabbeinu Hananel lived in Tunisia a little bit before Rashi. His commentary also is very helpful in explaining the text of the Talmud. We have section F, opposite Rabbeinu Hananel on the other side, on the left side, Hagos Habach. That is edits or amendments to both Rashi and Tosafos, where he found either a word that needed to be corrected, or some correction or some clarification that goes in Hagos Habach. Then we have section G by the Vilna Gaon. That's skip one down after the Hagos Habach. That's the Vilna Gaon who lived in the 18th century. And he, like the Hagos Habach, is dealing primarily with correcting the text where he felt that there was some error or some misprint or some clarification that's needed. Now, until now, we've been dealing with commentary and edits, and here we have, and now we'll move on to another section of the commentary, which is not so much commentary, but reference help, reference notes. And our first example of that is section I. Section I is at the top left side of the page, Masoret Hashas. And this helps us to cross-reference where this passage will be cited elsewhere in the Talmud. So if the Talmud here is quoting something that is found on another page in another tractate, or where this concept comes up elsewhere, you'll find the reference to that in Masoret Hashas. Section J is one of my favorites. That's at the top right of the page. Ein Mishpat. That will give you the reference to where this Talmud is quoted in the codes of Jewish law and the halachic works. That would be Shulchan Aruch, Maimonides, and others. And we'll talk about those texts, that is the halachic works. That's the subject of next week. But in any case, this is very helpful when you want to when you're reading a passage of Talmud and you want to know, well, how is this actually put into practice in the codes, in the halachic law? You'll look in Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah and find the reference there. So that, I don't know actually when that was. I think that's more recent. It's very yeah.
Sounds like indexing.
Yes, it is. It's kind of a reverse footnote. Yeah. Yeah. And then the Torah Or, which is also very useful, section K on the right side toward the bottom, is references for where a pasuk, where a verse in the written Torah is quoted. That'll give you the chapter and verse, because in the original text of the Talmud, it assumed that you knew the whole Torah already and you know the verses that they're quoting. So this will give you the source text of the Bible, of the Torah quote that's being referenced in the Talmud. Okay, so that's the page.
So each one of these commentaries has something different to say about it.
Each one of these commentaries has something unique, a unique perspective to offer in enhancing our study of the Talmud. And because I say that because they are not the Talmud. Let's clarify our terms. The Mishnah is the original text. The Talmud is discussing the Mishnah, right? In this case, we're speaking about the Talmud specifically as that center text. The Talmud is a discussion of Mishnah. The commentaries will be looking at whatever is in that center text and will be clarifying that center text. Okay, both the Mishnah and the Talmud. So they're not doing the work of the Talmud. They're not an alternative take on the Mishnah equal to the Talmud. They are helping you to work with the text of the Talmud to understand how it explains the Mishnah, broadly speaking. Yeah, Professor?
I was just saying, and the Mishnah is on the Bible.
The Mishnah itself, you could say that. You could say that, but I would, is the Mishnah the commentary on the Bible? You could say that. You could say that the Mishnah is a commentary on the Bible, but actually the Mishnah is a companion to the Bible. Yeah. The Mishnah is, if you read the Mishnah, you would not necessarily appreciate how it relates to the written Torah. That's part of what happens in the Gemara, in the Talmud. And we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Let's just take this step by step. Save the questions a little bit to when we get into when we put the whole thing together, and then we'll see if we can, because things will become clear as we know more. Some questions will kind of fall into place as we work through it. Okay. Now, there are only so many commentaries that can fit on a page, and so throughout the years, more commentaries were developed that were considered indispensable to the Talmud, didn't fit on the page, and so they're printed in the back of the book. And that's why you have, let's say in this particular volume, the Talmud is, the Gemara section is only about that much, and the commentaries is that. So you would have to go to the back of the book, and there we have some key commentaries in the back of the Talmud are the Rif, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi from the 11th century, Fez, Morocco, the commentary of Rambam on just the Mishnah of Maimonides. We have the Rosh, which is the looks only at the practical halacha, the practical lessons that we should take from the Talmudic discussion. That's from Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel, originally of Germany and later Spain in the 13th and 14th century. Maharsha, who Rabbi Shmuel Edels of Poland, 16th and 17th century, who comments on the Talmud, the Rashi and the Tosafot. He goes into all of them and explains them. Sometimes he has questions on Rashi or feels that Rashi needs to be explained. Sometimes he feels that Tosafot needs to be explained. He's also excellent at analyzing. He's one of the few commentaries in the book that places a special focus on the Agadic aspects of the Talmud, that is the mystical, mythical, narrative parts of the Talmud. And then we have Maharshal and Maharam, who are additional commentaries. That's just a fraction of what goes on in Talmudic study. When a person says the Talmud, in addition to being all the things that we mentioned before, is also defines what Jewish learning is. If there is a single activity that we could say defines Jewish life, the Jewish way of life, it's learning. Jewish people don't only, Jewish tradition doesn't just call us to learn as children or as students in the educational system, or if we're trying to be rabbis. Jewish tradition calls us to be always learning. And traditionally, when Jews learned, the greater part of the learning has been Talmud. As a matter of fact, if a religiously observant person today culturally says, what is he doing? He's learning. Chances are, what is he learning? He's learning Talmud. And that for yeshiva students, the biggest part of the schedule, the daily study schedule, is Talmud. But beyond that, Jews of all walks of life and all levels of education are studying Talmud, whether it's the daily daf, the page-a-day program, which allows one to complete the study of Talmud in 7 years at a page a day, or if it's carving out a specific amount of time each day to study Talmud. That's really a huge part of Jewish learning. And then beyond that, Talmud is not only learning, it's also a way of thinking. It informs the casual conversation of learned Jews, or even of not learned Jews, are in the way in a community that's filled with learning. Even those who are not learning, the ordinary conversations are filled with Talmudic back and forth. I'll give you an example. I had to call somebody in Lakewood, New Jersey, which is one of the big communities that are really one of the most dedicated to learning communities in America today. And I was speaking to the secretary, a woman in this organization, and she says, I said something to her about whatever, and she says to me, "What's pshat?" which is, or what's the explanation? What's the explanation of what you're saying? Which is a typical Talmudic conversational term. Or as we spoke last week, kal v'chomer, which is one of the 13 principles of analyzing the text. If you have the minor rule applies, then certainly the major rule applies. So this is something you might hear children saying. If you get kal v'chomer, it's like it's a thing that fits into to ordinary conversation. Why does the Talmud occupy such an important, from a significance point of view and also from a quantity point of view, place in Jewish study? There are, as we have talked already, there are so many different texts, books, and modes of study in the field of Torah. We have biblical commentaries. We have the written Torah. We have biblical commentaries. We have midrash. We have halacha. We have Kabbalah. We have philosophy. We have musar. We have ethics. We have Hasidism, mysticism. All of these are important areas of Torah. Why is Talmud the number one? And the short answer is because Talmud is the most important and authoritative record of the oral Torah. Now, we've already talked at length about the relationship between the written and oral components of the Torah. As we discussed, the written Torah is divine revelation, and the oral Torah is where the human mind is engaged to analyze the divine revelation and is a partner in that study, where we bring our own minds into that work. And so this therefore is why Talmud is so central to Jewish learning, because while in the way that Tanakh, the 26 books of the Tanakh represent the body of the written Torah, the Talmud is the most comprehensive document of the oral Torah. And so while Tanakh is the source of Jewish learning, Talmud is the body of Jewish learning. Tanakh is the origin, is what gives us what to learn, and Talmud is what that learning looks like. And primarily in the way that we engage with the truths revealed to us in the written Torah. So To better understand why this is the case, we'll look at some of the history. Okay, and so now we're going to break apart the Mishnah and the Talmud. So far, what we've said is, I think the key point that I want you to walk away from so far is, number one, when we say Talmud, we mean many things. We mean a style of learning. We mean a specific text. We mean many commentaries that aid us in understanding that text. And then, most broadly speaking, Talmud is an authoritative and comprehensive work that collects, as in the broadest and most comprehensive way possible, the entirety of the oral Torah. Okay, how did we get there? Let's start by reviewing this point. The Talmud consists of two primary components. When we now going back to that center section at the core of the page of Talmud, it comprises of two parts fundamentally. There is Mishnah and Gemara or Talmud. Mishnah was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, in the Holy Land in Eretz Yisrael toward the end of the 2nd century. This was the first time that the oral Torah, that any part of the oral Torah was officially written down. In the second century, no, 160, yeah. No, in the year 160. Yeah. In the year, right. The year 70 is the 1st century. The year 170 is the 2nd century. Yeah. So it was towards the end of the 2nd century that he compiled the Mishnah. The Gemara is structured as a discussion on the Mishnah. The Gemara was completed in Babylonia at the beginning of the 6th century. So about 300-400 years later. Okay. Sometimes when we say the word Talmud, we're referring only to the Gemara part, but broadly, Talmud includes both Mishnah and Gemara.
Originally, it was only written in.
So originally, let's start with the history, okay? In lesson 1, we talked about how the Tanakh was written down by Moshe Rabbeinu, and the prophets, and the rest of the Tanakh was written by the prophets who followed him, and how it was canonized, it was organized into the books of the Tanakh as we know it by the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah, by the men of the Great Assembly. And they made the final determinations about which books would be in the Tanakh, beyond, of course, the 5 books of Moses, which were given. From that moment, from the time that the Knesset HaGedolah, the Great Assembly, canonized the Tanakh, that was the only book that Jewish people had. Of course, there was explanations and practical ramifications to Jewish life and Jewish practice and understanding of the Tanakh, but it was not written down until the compilation of the Mishnah at the end of the 2nd century. Okay, so let's look at now. Maimonides, Rambam, who you may be familiar with, describes the process of how that worked in text 1. Okay, this is from his introduction to the Mishnah Torah. Again, we're going to get into Rambam's Mishnah Torah next week, but suffice to say that this is what he writes in the introduction to Mishnah Torah. Okay, I'm just going to paraphrase it. You can read it, text 1, 2, and 3, if you want to really get into that text. When the Torah was given to Moshe at Mount Sinai, And this is why when you mentioned before that the Mishnah is a commentary on the Bible, it isn't a commentary on the Bible in the same way that Talmud is a commentary on Mishnah, and certainly not in the same way that Rashi is a commentary on Talmud. The commandments that were given to Moshe at Har Sinai were given together with their explanations, which says that both the written Torah is divine revelation and the tradition that goes along with it about what that means is also a divine revelation. Okay, the written Torah was called the written Torah, the Chumash, and the explanation, the meaning of it, is the oral Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu transcribed the Torah, the Sefer Torah as we have it, in his own hand at the time of his passing, but he did not write down the explanations. He told them over as he taught the Torah to Yoshua, to Joshua, and to the elders who passed it out through the rest of the generations.
Error never came into play.
There wouldn't be error from those days. From the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, we're analyzing the components here, okay? Then we'll talk about how they work. From the days of Moshe Rabbeinu until Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, as we said, in the 2nd century, no one ever wrote down this explanation of the written Torah for the purpose of disseminating. Now, many people would have taken notes in class and kept notes for themselves, but primarily this was meant to be an oral tradition. As a matter of fact, it was forbidden. It was considered something you're not allowed to do, to write it down in a formal way. And so each head of the court in his day and the teachers of Torah would have had their own notes that they referred to as they passed on this tradition. And the tradition would always be tested against the 13 rules that we described in previous classes. And so that would be a way of making sure that your tradition is accurate beside the Tanakh, beside the written Torah. Okay, so another key place that the oral tradition lived was the Sanhedrin, the High Court, the Sanhedrin, the Court of 71, was actually originally founded by Moshe Rabbeinu, by Moses, and in each generation, the Sanhedrin is the final authority on all questions of Torah law. So, as described in text 2, if there was a question of Torah law, it would be turned to the rabbi in one's community, to the Jewish court in that town. If that couldn't be, it would be brought to the regional court. And ultimately, if the question couldn't be resolved regionally, it would ultimately be brought to the Sanhedrin, to the High Court, which sat inside the Beis HaMikdash, inside the Holy Temple. If they had a tradition to answer that question, they would answer the question based on tradition. This is very important. And if they did not have a tradition which addressed that question, they would take a vote. And based on their vote, they would establish the law. A tradition meaning that they had a tradition that this is what Moshe Rabbeinu told his student, who told his student, who told his student, who told my teacher, that this is the law in this case. But when it came to applying the law to a circumstance that hadn't yet been brought up, if there was some question, it will be brought to a vote. And the Sanhedrin represented the entire Jewish people. There is nobody who could disagree with the Sanhedrin. It represented, and whatever decisions were made by the Sanhedrin are enshrined and canonized as law, and they're binding upon the Jewish people as the oral Torah is. Then, under the leadership of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who was born in 135, passed away in 220, he was the head, he was the Nasi, the prince, the head of the Sanhedrin about 100 years after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. Rambam goes on to say in text 3, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi Due to troubles which were arising, there was Roman occupation at the time. They were beginning to place restrictions on how Torah could be taught, whether it could be taught. They were beginning to suppress the practice of Judaism. The temple being destroyed, Jews were beginning to spread out and to live in other places. And so Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi felt that a single text available to everyone should be compiled. And so what he did, if you look at the first paragraph on page 102, text 3, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, this is again from Maimonides, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi collected all the teachings, all the laws, and all the explanations and commentaries that were handed down from Moses, and those that were taught by the courts in each generation, the Sanhedrin, concerning the entire Torah. From all of these, he composed the text of the Mishnah. He taught it publicly and revealed it to the Jewish people, who all wrote it down and disseminated it everywhere. So Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi essentially collected all the teachings that were available in his time. Many people had notes, or they had memorized these traditions, and he organized them in a formal structure. And now we go to the Mishnah. The Mishnah, by the way, is designed to be studied by heart. One of the meanings of the word Mishnah is repetition. It means Mishnah means lishanen, right? That can mean to sharpen, and it can also mean to repeat, to review. And so the Mishnah is not a small book, 63 tractates, as we said, 523 chapters, 4,184 Mishnayos, paragraphs that cover virtually every aspect of Jewish life. These 63 tractates are divided into 6 orders. And these are the 6 orders of the Mishnah, okay? You have them in, I guess, on page 103. The 6 orders of the Mishnah. Zraim, seeds, right? The Shisha Sidrei Mishnah. Seeds, Zraim, deals with daily prayers and agricultural life. The laws that pertain to farming, produce, etc. The laws of Shemitah will be in there. The laws of tithes, grain tithes will be in there, etc. Order number 2 is Moed. Moed means appointed times. Here you'll find the laws of Shabbos and Yontif and the Jewish calendar. As a matter of fact, currently in our weekly Talmud class, we're studying Talmud Rosh Hashanah, which deals with the Jewish calendar, and that will be in the book of Moed. The 3rd order is Nashim, women, which deals with the laws of marriage and divorce. The 4th order, Nezikin, damages, deals with civil and criminal law. The 5th, Kodashim, sacraments, deals with the service in the Beis Hamikdash in the Holy Temple and the laws of kashrus, the kosher laws, and Taharot, purities, deals with the laws of ritual purity, which pertain also to the sacraments, because you couldn't do a sacrament unless you were in a state of ritual purity. And so Taharot deals with the various nuances of what can become impure and how it can become purified. In your book, in your student book, if you want to look after the class, on page 134 to 140, in the additional features section, there is a more detailed look at each of the tractates of the Talmud and what they deal with. Okay, now, you're confused.
Yeah, because those 6, let's see.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of.
Okay, so I'll go through it again. Zraim has 11 tractates. For example, Brachos, Maser Sheni, Kilayim is in Zraim. Moed has 12 tractates that will have Shabbos, Yuma, Sukkah, Rosh Hashanah, etc. Nashim has 7 tractates that will have Gittin, Kiddushin, Ksubos, Yevamos, dealing with the laws of marriage and divorce and contracts, marriage contracts. And from there we go into general contract law. Nizikin damages will have Bava Metzia, Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra, etc. That's the civil laws. Kodashim has 11 tractates. And Taharot has 12 tractates. Okay. Right. So there's kind of like a larger categorizations and then subcategories and subcategories. Okay. All right. That's kind of an overview of the structure of the Mishnah, but I want to talk about what's not in the Mishnah. Okay. Even as the Mishnah was written, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi tried to compile a text that would cover the full explanation of the Torah and the full body of the oral tradition up to that point. But most of the oral tradition remained as it was, remained oral. And the reason is because, first of all, Rabbi Yehuda wanted to preserve this practice of learning. Not book learning, but people learning, student learning. He wanted to preserve the relationship between teacher and student and between community and each other in learning. And so, which is the danger when you write it down in a book, is that it becomes something that you read from the book rather than learn in conversation. And so Rabbi Yehuda, on the one hand, didn't want the tradition to be lost, so he wrote it down. But he only wrote down what was absolutely necessary to be written so that it shouldn't be forgotten. The Mishnah is very concise. If laws that are common knowledge were not written down in the Mishnah, laws about which there were no questions or disagreements, not written down in the Mishnah. And in many cases, when a law is written, it's written in such a way that if you read it carefully, you can understand or infer another law from it. And that is part of the tradition around how do you learn a Mishnah. You don't just read a Mishnah and it is what it is in front of you. Every line in the Mishnah is there to be analyzed and to bring out further and deeper meaning. Okay, that's one fact to know about Mishnah. The second fact to know about Mishnah is that it is almost exclusively the halacha aspect of the tradition. We spoke in the past about the halacha versus the agada, the legal versus the moral and mystical aspects of the Torah, or the narrative aspects of the Torah. The Mishnah is almost exclusively legal. There is the agada aspects of the Torah are recorded only later in the Gemara, in the Talmud, and in Midrash. And finally, most importantly, the oral Torah is not a static set of rules. It's an ongoing conversation, both with the new realities that we face, applying the Torah to it, as well as new circumstances that need to be to which the Torah needs to be applied, and also new ordinances or rules which were instituted by the Sanhedrin or by the sages throughout the years that were also recorded, that also need to be included in our Torah that may not have been written down in the Mishnah. So it's possible, for example, that there is a rule in the that would be observed by Jewish people that wasn't in the Mishnah because it was only instituted after the period of the Mishnah. And of course, as we learn more Torah, there will be new insights and new understandings, new revelations will emerge that can also be included in the oral tradition, but are not in the Mishnah. So this is all to say in a very long way that while the Mishnah created a core text for the oral Torah, it in no way represents the entire oral Torah. There was, even when Rabbi Yehuda wrote down the oral Torah in the Mishnah, there was still very much left over that was not written down and still remained oral. Okay, but the Mishnah now serves as the starting point for any time a person will begin to study the oral tradition. They'll turn to the Mishnah and analyze it. But the way the Mishnah is designed is that it requires relationship with the teacher to disciple, and requires training in how to learn it. So both that it should be done, receiving a tradition about how to learn it, training in shaping one's mind to be able to analyze it correctly, and also to have the tradition of what are the correct interpretations that have emerged from the study of Mishnah. And this is still being done today, also after the Talmud. All right. I feel like I need to take a breath.
Oh, so
No, I don't need to. Yes.
is the oral Torah, is that correct? Or the Talmud is the oral Torah?
The oral Torah is bigger than the Mishnah and bigger than the Talmud.
Okay, so it's combined.
Even bigger than the Mishnah and the Talmud together, there's still more beyond that that can still be called the oral Torah.
Which is not written and was not explained, it still continues to be oral.
Yes,
Torah.
yes,
So
yes. It's
now
still there still continued to be oral Torah even after the Mishnah and Talmud were written down. Just for example, I'll give you two examples, one concrete and one general. Concrete example, the Midrash, right? The Midrash wasn't written down as part of the Mishnah, and much of it wasn't written down in the Talmud. A lot of it is in the Talmud, but much of it is not in the Talmud. Then there are the explanations and the other things like Musar, for example, right? Which is ethical behavior. Some of it's in Pirkei Avot, which is in the Mishnah, but a lot of it is not. And finally, the last point is our conversation happening right now, in which we are clarifying our own understanding of this, is also part of the oral Torah.
So, my question is. Very simple. Ready? Why wasn't the oral law originally written when the written law was written? They knew it was going to be forgotten as the years went on.
Say it again. Why wasn't the oral law
Written, we did then at the same time that.
by Moshe Rabbeinu?
Because.
Why we discussed it. We discussed that already. It's for another time.
I expect it.
When you write it down, you lose something. You lose the partnership, you lose the living nature, and you lose the ability to be adaptable. If you write it down, you lose you take away the likelihood that it will be discussed in the same way. It takes away the partnership aspect of it. And also you know what? We'll learn a little Gemara and you'll understand. Hopefully we'll understand. Okay. Now what is the Gemara? So until now we talked about the Mishnah. What is the Gemara part? So several generations after the compilation of the Mishnah, remember the Mishnah is composed in the land of Israel, about 100 years after the destruction of the temple, of the Beis HaMikdash. And several generations later, again, the need arose for an authoritative record of the oral Torah, which is many things which were not written down in the Mishnah. And so in order to transcribe all that was discussed, debated, and discovered and taught, and in the previous 300 years since the writing down of the Mishnah. And so to this, we have the Talmud, which incorporates the Mishnah adds the Gemara, which is the analysis of the Mishnah. The Gemara documents the teachings and deliberations and arguments of the sages who studied and taught in the great centers of learning in Babylonia and in the land of Israel during the 300 years following the Mishnah. So if you look on your book in page 106, you'll see the map of where the Mishnah is, where the Talmud comes from. We have the Mishnah is composed in Israel. The Jerusalem Talmud, which is called the Jerusalem Talmud, is composed in the land of Israel also. And then the Babylonian Talmud is composed in Babylonia, which is present-day Iraq, in Naharda, Sura, Pumbedisa, and Mechoza. Those are the main centers of learning of the Jewish people at that time, and it is there that the Talmud becomes organized and collected. Where are these places? You have Pumbedisa is near present-day Fallujah. Naharda is Anbar. Have you heard of Anbar province? That's where Naharda is. Sura doesn't exist anymore. The town doesn't exist anymore. Sura was an entirely Jewish town, but it was called Sura. And Mechoza, we don't know much about either. Scary.
And how these million Jews and families live there, and now it's dust.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's in Europe now.
Yes. Iraq was at one point in time the headquarters of the Jewish people. Yeah.
And Europe,
Right.
and then now none of them have any.
After the destruction of the temple, first of all.
It's not even
This is the Talmud. The Talmud is composed after the destruction of the second temple.
Yeah.
But yes, Jews lived in Babylonia already during the time of the second temple. They lived there, yes. But primarily, the Babylonian community really begins to flourish after the destruction of the second temple. Okay, let's get now into the meat of this thing. How does the Gemara unpack a Mishnah? Okay, the most basic function of Gemara is to explain and take apart the Mishnah. Let's say there are many forms that this can take, but there are three fundamental things that the Gemara, the Talmud, will do in analyzing a Mishnah. It's going to take the Mishnah apart sideways, backwards, and forwards. Okay, what do we mean by that? Laterally, sideways. As we said, the language of the Mishnah is concise. It's very short, like shorthand. And so a large part of the Gemara is just going to be taking apart the meaning of the Mishnah to expand, what does this phrase mean? What are the circumstances of the case presented in this Mishnah? Why did the Mishnah choose this case to illustrate this law? And what would the law be if the circumstances were different? Okay, the Gemara will also quote parallel teachings from that era, traditions which haven't been necessarily written down, not included in the Mishnah itself, or other Mishnahs, and compare them and contrast them with the Mishnah being studied at that time. And when two Mishnahs seem to contradict each other, the Talmud will try to resolve that contradiction or explain why these two Mishnahs why these two Mishnahs actually contradict each other. That's laterally. If you look at our then when we go to when the Mishnah has differing opinions, when the Mishnah has an argument between two sages, which it often does, the Gemara will explain the reasoning behind these two opinions. Understand why this rabbi says this and that rabbi says that. And then the Gemara will ask, which one should we follow? Okay, that's sideways. That's expanding the Mishnah laterally. Then the Gemara will also analyze the Mishnah backwards, asking, what is the source of this law? Where does it come from in the Torah? And show the equation of how the text of the Torah could be analyzed or could be expounded to result in this particular Mishnah teaching. And then finally, forward, the Gemara, once we understand all of that, the Gemara will carry it forward and apply the principles to new questions and new circumstances. So the Gemara might ask, well, this is the circumstance described in the Mishnah, but what about this circumstance, and how can we apply the principles that we have derived from this Mishnah to a different circumstance, or to a more current example? And the sages will discuss and debate what the ruling should be, and they'll bring proofs from this Mishnah and different Mishnahs and other teachings. So just to look at figure 3.4 on page 107, just some common questions that the Talmud asks in each of these three sections. In the lateral section, expanding the Mishnah, some common phrases will be Tanya, Tanu Rabbanan, it was taught, our rabbis taught. Here is another teaching that seems to relate to this Mishnah, or Hacha b'may askinan, what are the circumstances of this teaching? Or Raminhu, I seem to have a contradictory Mishnah or a contradictory teaching. My Kamash Malan, what is the Mishnah adding to us? What new teaching, what is this particular detail of the Mishnah giving us that we couldn't figure out on our own? Kaman Hilchasa, who should we follow? Which of the opinions should we follow? Or Tzrichusa, why did the Mishnah bring these three different cases? We could have, or these three different examples, we could have derived the same rule from only one example. Okay, that's the lateral version. The backward version, Minohani Mili, what is the source of this law? B'may kamiflagi, what is the reason for the dispute between these two rabbis? And then forward, Ibayalahu, let me ask you a theoretical question that relates to this Mishnah that isn't explicated in the Mishnah. Or Tashma, we have two rabbis in our current times who have an argument about something that's not related to in the Mishnah. Can we bring a proof from this Mishnah to support their view in an argument that isn't described in the Mishnah? Okay. So now I want to go back to the main point, which is that the Talmud is considered, that is the Gemara, the analysis of the Mishnah, is considered the most authoritative document on the totality of the oral Torah. And the reason for that is because that was the last time that the Jewish people all lived in one place. We're not dealing with the Jerusalem Talmud. The truth is there was a connection between the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud. But at that time, the sages, the last sages of the Talmud, Ravina and Ravashi, compiled the Talmud as it was known up until that point, and the Talmud is considered to have the authority of the Sanhedrin. And from that point on, anyone who is trying to make any determination of Jewish law is doing so based on the Talmud. There is no other authority that contains something that can be considered relevant in the oral law that is outside of the Talmud. Ravina and Ravashi compiled at that time everything that could be known and codified it, or not everything that could be known, but everything that they could collect at that time. And it was codified and organized alongside the Mishnah. And it was agreed to by all of the sages of the time. And so after that, we are all trying to work with what we know from that point. Okay, and you have the again, Rambam Maimonides in his introduction to the Mishnah Torah in text 4 explains this at length, but I'll leave that to you in your own reading. There's also the Jerusalem Talmud, as we said, a Talmud which was compiled in Jerusalem a little bit before the Babylonian Talmud by but the difference between the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, there's two reasons why the Babylonian Talmud, the Talmud Bavli, is considered primary. Even though you'd think the Jerusalem Talmud, it's in Israel, it's so much better. Two reasons. Number one, the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud, is later, so it has the last word. The second reason is that the Jerusalem Talmud is direct. It doesn't record the discussions and the arguments and debates in the same way that the Babylonian Talmud does. And therefore, it doesn't give that opportunity for the full understanding of the depth and nuance of halacha, because you don't understand you don't get the equations, you don't get the background as much when it's told so directly. So, let's take a few minutes to learn some Gemara on page 113, text 7. Before we do this, I want you to know we have about 15 minutes to learn this Gemara. I learned this Gemara in school and spent about a month on it. So we'll try and dip our toe. The Mishnah says as follows.
What page was that?
Page 113. The Mishnah says as follows. Shnayim ochazim betalis. Two people are grasping a garment. Ze omer ani mitzasiha, v'ze omer ani mitzasiha. This one says, I found it, and this one says, I found it. Ze omer kula sheli, v'ze omer kula sheli. This one says, it's all mine, and this one says, it's all mine. What should we do? You see, I just inserted my own words into the Mishnah because it's so concise. What should we do? Ze yishava she'ein lo ba pachos mechetzia. Let this one take an oath that he owns no less than half of it. V'ze yishava, and let the other one take an oath she'ein lo ba pachos mechetzia, that he owns no less than half of it. He says it's all mine, but he says, swear that you own no less than half of it. V'yachloku, and then divide the garment. But it's good point. Shlomo said, do that with the child, and it didn't work. And we'll see another case where the Gemara doesn't want to do that. We'll get there. Hold, you got to stay with. It seems pretty straightforward, no? But remember what we said. The Mishnah is written in shorthand, and every word in the Mishnah is precise, and we should look into the text and understand its nuance. So one question that we can ask about this text is, what is the meaning behind the Mishnah's words, Shnaim ochazim betalis, two people grasping a talis, holding on to a talis, right? Are these two people literally holding on to the garment as they walk into the court? Or what if, why couldn't the Mishnah say, two people are arguing over who owns the garment? So to understand what the Mishnah is telling us here, we have to turn to another passage, this time from the Gemara, not from the Mishnah, and a different tractate, Bava Kama. This is Bava Kama, page 46b. Page 114, text 8. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, said Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Nachmani. From where do we know that the one who is seeking to take property out of his fellow's possession has to bring proof. It's incumbent upon him to provide evidence. Minayin lahamotzi mechavero alav haraya. Shenemar, as the Torah says from the verse, Kol mi bal devar migash alehem. Whoever has a matter for adjudication should approach them. He has to present evidence. So if you approach the judges, that is when you come to court, mi bal devarim, if all you have is words, yigash alehem, bring your words, your proof to the court in order to take away something which is in the possession of another.
Where?
The story is not necessarily presenting proof. That would be quite a jump.
Well, you would have to bring your claim.
Yeah, one would think.
You have to bring your, and then nobody's assuming that your claim is valid, but you can't seize property from somebody else without bringing a valid claim, right? So Rashi on our text, Rashi on the text of the two people fighting over the garment. Let's learn a little Rashi. Rashi says, Davka ochazin. Specifically, when the Mishnah says they're holding on to the talis, it uses that specifically. That is, that word is necessary. That is, that they're both holding on to the garment. Tishnehem muchzakim ba. They have both established ownership of it. They're both in possession of it. Ve'ein lezeh koach ba yoter mizeh. And neither of them has a stronger hold on it than the other. She'ilu, that if one of them was holding the garment and the other one wanted to seize it from him, he would have to bring proof, and the other one would keep it until such proof was brought. Or he would bring witnesses that it's his. He would not be believed to take it away from another person with just the oath. So therefore, we learn from this Mishnah that the oath that each of them swears that they deserve half of it, and that they deserve no less than half of it. Each one of them swears that it's at least half his, and then they split it. That only applies if they both have possession, because otherwise the one who has possession is assumed that it's his, and the other one has to bring witnesses or proof that it's his. Okay, and from here the Gemara goes, or we have another Gemara that is brought to bear in comparison to this Mishnah, and this is in Bava Batra. We today covered 3 tractates of Talmud. Bava Metzia discusses business law. Bava Kama discusses damage law. Bava Basra discusses property law. Okay, real estate law. So in Bava Batra, page 34b, text 10 in your book on page 116, this is a discussion about a boat. There's a boat in the sea, a ship in the sea, a tanker, and 2 people are arguing about it. This one says it's mine, and the other one says it's mine. So one came to court and says, it's mine, I want the court to seize it, and I'll bring witnesses that it's mine. Should we seize it or should we not seize it? He says, this guy's going to take it away. I have proof. I don't have it today. I'll bring it tomorrow. But in the meantime, hold on to that ship so that he doesn't take it away until I bring my proof. Should we seize it or not? Rav Huna says we seize it. Rav Yehuda says we do not seize it. Okay, what happened? The court seized the boat. The man went and he couldn't find his witnesses. Then he says to the court, okay, you know what? I don't have my witnesses. Let the boat go and he and I will fight it out. Do we release it or do we not release it? Rav Yehuda said we do not release it. Rav Papa said we do release it. And the halacha is, says the Talmud, we do not seize the property in such a case, but if the court did seize it, we do not release it. Okay, now, based on this discussion of the Talmud, we understand again how important it is that the Mishnah uses the text, 2 people are grasping a garment. Because it's only when both people are holding on to it that the property should be divided. If nobody is holding on to it, if nobody has established possession, as in the case of the boat floating in the water, the court wouldn't get involved until one of them produces evidence. And the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher ben Yechiel, who is the halachic collector, the collector of halachic rulings in the Talmud, he's in the back of the book. He says on our case of the talis, of the garment, he says as follows. When the two claimants, it's on page 118, text 11. When the two claimants stand in front of us holding the garment, we have to rule that the garment should be divided. Because if we see that something is in a person's property, if they have it in their possession, we have to assume that it's theirs, even though another person is contesting this and saying that it's mine. And therefore, we can't let people fight it out. We have to protect the rights of the person who has possession. Matter of fact, in American law, possession, 9/10 of the law, right? If you have it, it's assumed to be yours. This is the rule of chazaka. In this case, the case of the boat, however, is different, because in the case of the boat, neither of them are in possession of the boat, and they're both claiming that they own it, but they don't actually have possession. And therefore, the court has no reason to get involved in this case, because this guy says, he's taking my boat, stop him. You can't do that. That's not the role of the court, because they may actually be taking something that's not his. So therefore, because you might be depriving a person of their property without just cause. However, right, it's a question of rights. If I come into court and say, seize that boat, so-and-so is trying to take it away from me, prove it's yours, right? But you can't prove it's yours. But you're taking away he's taking away what's mine. The court in that place, in that case, is not for sure protecting anyone's rights. Whereas when two people come in holding a garment, there is at least some right in somebody's case here. And therefore something has to be, how do you divide a garment? Good question. That's also discussed in the Gemara. Two options, either cut it in half or sell it and divide the money. Depends how big they are. Remember that the background of this Mishnah. Now, it's very important to note, by the way, that the context of this Mishnah described in the Gemara is, and if you read the text of the Mishnah, you can see it there alluded. What's the second line of the Mishnah? Two people grasping a garment. This one says, I found it. And this one says, I found it, right? So you're talking about a garment which was left in the street. And the later in the Mishnah, it discusses in which circumstances is finders keepers, right? So but we're saying this is a Mishnah, this is a garment which is in the street. And two people tried to grab it at once, right? So if however, it was a case of where two people go to the store and they take something from layaway, and each one says, I put that on layaway, and the other one says, I put that on layaway, that would be a different case, right? And that brings us to text 12. Two people entrusted money with a third person. Okay? One deposited 100 dinars, and the other one deposited 200 dinars. This one says the 200 are mine, and the other one says the 200 are mine. So what do? The Mishnah says we give 100 to one and 100 to the other, and the remainder is put away until Eliyahu Hanavi comes, until the prophet Elijah comes. Leave it in escrow in perpetuity until the matter is resolved. Now hold on. Says Rabbi Yosei, if we do that, the swindler loses nothing. Anytime a person goes and says, oh, the 200 is mine, so he gets his 100 anyways. Best case scenario, the guy believes him and gives him the 200. Worst case scenario, he walks away with his original 100. So why not make trouble? Rabbi Yossi says, no, we find them for making an argument, and the person should lose, and this way, all the money should be put away until Eliyahu Hanavi comes. And in this way, Rabbi Yossi is saying, perhaps he'll be motivated to tell the truth. And that's your Solomon's case there. Because in that case, they both lose the baby. So it motivates but that's not really the point that I wanted to bring out here. Now, to your thing, didn't they write anything down? Excellent point. What happens if you walk into the bank and I put 100 and somebody else puts 200, or I put 200, other puts 100. I put in 200, right? And the bank can't figure out whose money is whose, right? So what does the bank have to do? Two people walk into the bank and say, I put 200. The bank has to be FDIC insured, and they have to give each person what they say they're owed, right? In this case, however, it's not the case. What happened is, as the Gemara describes in this Mishnah, the Gemara asks your question. The Gemara says the only logical way to understand this Mishnah is that the two people came together with a bag. And they put the money inside, 200 and 100. So there's $300 in the bag. And they said, this is our money. 200 is mine, 100 is his. And please watch it for us. So the person who's watching the money says they trust each other. Why do I have to worry? So now they come fighting later. That's not my problem. I don't have to figure out whose money is whose, right? The only question is, what do I do now with this money? The person who's watching the money doesn't have any right to keep it. He has possession of it, but it's not his. So because then the liar gets an extra 50.
But then the one who's telling the truth only loses.
But that would be disenfranchising him of his rights.
But he doesn't get.
And then what you're doing is encouraging people to go into to tell lies because they at least make $50 for every lie. Right?
Gets back his 100, but he doesn't get punished.
So according to Rabbi Yossi, the one who told the lie shouldn't get his 100 either. Come back and tell the truth and you'll get your money. When they both agree, then they know which one's telling a lie. Okay, so basically, the court wouldn't grant the disputed 100 dinars to one of the claimants, nor does it divide it between them, nor does it refuse to get involved. The court takes possession of the money and holds on to it. What this means is that when one of them is going to admit, he'll get his money. So the Gemara asks, what's the difference between the two Mishnahs? Why does our Mishnah of the talis, of the garment, rule that the garment should be divided between two claimants, whereas the second Mishnah rules that the entire funds should be set aside, or at least part of the fund should be set aside? Why don't we tell the two guys fighting over the garment, when you guys can figure out who it belongs to, you'll get it. In the meantime, it's staying here until Eliyahu Hanavi comes. Why don't we use that as solution in the case of the garment? So again, it comes back to, we already discussed this in our back and forth over here. We did a little live Talmud, right? But look in the text of the Rosh. He says, so you might think that the reason is because neither of the two are in possession of the money. And therefore, they're arguing like the boat. There's something over there. And in that case, it should, if that were the case, that there are two people fighting over money that's somewhere else, what does the court do? He doesn't get involved until someone can bring proof, right? That's what we said in the case of the boat. The court stays out of it until somebody brings proof. We don't get involved if you can't figure it out. When it's not in when it's in your possession, however, the court has to get involved to make sure that somebody's rights are not disenfranchised. Now, the Rosh says, actually, in this case, there is possession. What's the possession? The person who's watching the money is acting as a shaliach, is acting as an agent of these people. When they came and said, watch my money for me, what they did is, what they're saying is, take possession of this money on my behalf right now. And he asserts that. He says, I agree. I am in possession of this money. Read the language of the Rosh. It's as if both of them are holding the money, since the Baili, the person watching the money, in whose possession the question of ownership was born, is holding the money on their authorization. So his hand is legally regarded as the extension of their hands. And so in this case, it's as if both of them are holding on to the talus. Why then don't we split it the same way we do with the talis. Says the Gemara, page 3a in Bava Metzia on that Mishnah. Because in that case, page 122, text 14, in that case, there is certainly a swindler. In this case, who's to say there is a swindler? Remember the text of the Mishnah. How did this garment come into their possession? How did it come into their possession? They found it. So nobody's a liar. Nobody's trying to cheat anybody here. When this one says it's all mine and this one says it's all mine, there are a number of possibilities. Either they both picked it up at the exact same second, in which case they both have full possession of it and they both have rights to have full possession of it in this moment. The other possibility is that one of them honestly believes that he picked it up. Right? There is a possibility that he's lying, but there is a very likely possibility here that neither of them is lying. And what they're doing is sharing, or they're contesting, equally contestants in this garment. So, and therefore, in this case, the Talmud says, the Mishnah says, divide it. And in that case, the Talmud says, hold the money in escrow until you figure it out. So again, we go back to this question. Why did the Mishnah need such a complicated story? Right? Why didn't the Mishnah simply present the case in which two people are grasping a garment, each one claiming that it's theirs? What if one of them says he found it and the other one says, no, it's mine, I bought it? Right? Because in that case, that detail is very important. Because in the case, if you would have the person says I found it and the other one says I bought it, you would have to bring a receipt. You couldn't make an oath. You couldn't just swear that it's yours. Right? And in the case of the contested deposit, the people with the money, one of them is honest and the other person is a swindler. Right? When one of them is saying a deliberate lie to steal money from his friend. Right? But in the case of the garment, it could be an honest dispute. Now, the truth is that the Torah wants to compromise. And I'm sorry. The truth is that dividing it is a last resort. We would much rather give the person what is rightfully theirs. We don't want to compromise and take away something from somebody that's actually theirs. It's only because, and that's why in the case of the money, we don't compromise because we know that somebody's being stolen from here. So we don't compromise and take away something that's someone's. But in this case, where it's possible that it really belongs to each of them equally, so then we'll compromise. All right. And here you have on page 123, you have a little chart that lays this out. Okay, page figure 3.5. Let's look. Two people claim, we'll close with that. Two people claim a property, but neither has witnesses or other proof supporting their claim. So going down from there, how many people are in possession of the property? If it's one person in possession and the other person is not possession, then it stays with the person who's in possession until somebody brings proof to take it away. If it's in nobody's possession, then the court stays out of it. Let it stay out there floating, and there's no need for us to go and seize something that might belong to somebody and in so doing advantage somebody else. If two people are in possession of it, then we have to ask the question, is this a case in which one of them is definitely lying? So if it's possible that neither of them is lying, if it's possible that both of them are not lying, then the property is divided. And if possibly one of them, if necessarily one of them has to be a liar, then the property is put in trust until Mashiach comes, who will answer all the questions. So you got a taste of the Babylonian Talmudic method with a little bit of Rashi, a little bit of Rosh, and some bringing together of different Talmudic cases and how they relate to each other. Now, the key here is that the details of the case are not clear at first reading. If you first read this Mishnah, you would not understand how unique it is and how the nuances of the text are so have such important ramifications for practical application. You would just walk away with this one Mishnah. You would think you could come away with some very serious errors. Wouldn't it have been easier if the Talmud had just said, in case A, the ruling is X, and in case B, the ruling is Y? But that's what halacha is. Halacha is, here's what you do. The role of Talmud, however, is about learning the process by which you come to understand why it is this way. And that is, in learning Talmud, we're not actually interested in knowing what you're supposed to do. As a matter of fact, in many of the discussions of the Talmud, it just says, so-and-so says X and here is Y, and so-and-so says Y and here's the reason why, right? I'm sorry. So-and-so says A and here's the reason why, and the other one says B and here's the reason why, and leaves it at that. Because the study of Talmud is about engaging your mind with the rationale, with the process, with the struggle to understand the divine logic. And when it comes down to the actual practical, that's the domain of a different discipline. That's halacha, which we will discuss with Hashem's help next week.
So.
Yes.
They take faculty students without the without their degrees.
That's true.
Is that or Torah or?
Yeah, you can go. Yes, actually, a good friend of mine, a number of friends of mine went from yeshiva to Columbia Law. Yeah, they have a degree in Talmudic law, and they do just fine. Yeah. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine had a degree in Talmudic law, and he went to he applied for a job as a paralegal to help put himself through school, and they told him you're overqualified. Yeah. All righty. Thanks for joining us, and hope to see you next time in good health and good spirits.